Today we are speaking with Shelby Hartman of DoubleBlind Magazine. She's joining us from Los Angeles. Shelby, thank you so much for being here. How did you find mushrooms? I mean, we know that, cannabis took the center stage for a long time and is still coming in, but now mushrooms are coming onto the stage. Cities like Denver and Oakland are working either to decriminalize them or really expand on mushrooms and mental health. So tell us, how did you find mushrooms?
It began for me like it begins for many people, which is in college. When I was a freshman in college, I tripped on mushrooms for the first time and obviously had no idea what I was getting myself into, because you can never know what you're getting yourself into before your first trip. Professionally, my co-founder Madison and I met at Columbia Journalism School, and afterwards were reporting on the psychedelic movement for LA Weekly, Vice, Rolling Stone, Playboy, and a number of other outlets. And towards the end of 2018, I was meditating and I just had this idea to start a psychedelic magazine and media company. And so that's what we did, and that's DoubleBlind.
Awesome. And so what was it like starting a magazine? People sometimes say print is dead, but this is such a fascinating topic that I almost think it throws that out the door. What was it like just, getting the pieces together and really bringing this idea to life?
It was really a labor of love. Like I said, I got my master's in journalism, long form magazine style writing. And so I love magazines and I love physical objects that can be touched. And as a journalist who has worked in so many different kinds of newsrooms and has seen the way that people engage with content that's on the internet, which frankly is not, not with a lot of presence and a lot of depth. You see a lot of people sharing things, but not actually reading them. You see people clicking and liking on things, but then not actually getting all the way through to the end of the story. We wanted to create something that was going to sort of encourage mindfulness, because that's what psychedelics are all about, right? And we figured having a physical object was going to encourage that.
And so for someone that's first experimenting or coming into the mushroom movement, the mushroom scene, what is Mushroom 101? What's the first thing someone should know when, trying to experiment either with psychedelic mushrooms or maybe even cooking mushrooms?
There are hundreds and hundreds of varieties of mushrooms, even dozens and dozens of kinds of psilocybin containing mushrooms or psychedelic mushrooms. And so I could never possibly cover all of them in one interview. I would say if you're interested in using psilocybin for mental health, whether it's for depression, anxiety, alcoholism, or just a general lack of sort of like meaning in your life, psilocybin has shown incredible promise for healing. And this isn't just anecdotal, it's scientific. There have been tens of millions of dollars at this point poured into rigorous double-blind randomized clinical trials investigating the therapeutic potential of psilocybin at prominent universities like NYU, Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, King's College London. Psilocybin has actually been put on what's called the FDA's fast track, given breakthrough therapy status for major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression, because they've shown so much promise in basically treating mental health conditions that our Western medical community has yet to figure out. And so if you're curious about psilocybin for mental health, I would say begin by looking at the data. There's a lot of it. And then secondly, if you want to embark on a journey with psilocybin mushrooms, it's really important that you're doing so in a way that is safe and intentional. So DoubleBlind is coming out with a course next month called Psychedelics 101, Using Psychedelics to Heal. It's covering everything you need to know, from how to choose the right psychedelic for you, to how to find a safe and legal vetted retreat center, to how to prepare for and process your psychedelic experience once it's over. There is so much more that goes into a psychedelic experience than the trip itself. And really the healing does come from the work that you put in once the trip is over to integrate the lessons, or sort of like the downloads that you get from that psychedelic during the experience. In terms of other kinds of mushrooms, I'm not an expert, but we partnered in our most recent mushroom growing course with an incredible company. I'm so passionate about them, called Rainbow. They have a medicinal mushroom tincture, which includes reishi and lion's mane and cordyceps and a number of other medicinal mushrooms. And, you know, medicinal mushrooms have been used for thousands of years for everything from inflammation to immunity. So we also have some stories on DoubleBlind Mag about that if you'd like to learn more.
Awesome. I mean, there's so much information on what you just said, and there's so much information, you know, out there in existence now. And you mentioned a couple studies. Is there any study in particular that really resonated with you, that maybe changed your perspective or brought certain things into focus for you?
I wouldn't say that there's a particular study that has shifted my perception of psychedelics. I actually personally sort of have a bias towards anecdotal evidence. So I know that we live in a society that holds sort of rigorous double-blind randomized clinical trials up on a pedestal and says, you know, we need to have a placebo, we need to have all these protocols, you know, in place in order to prove that something is effective and safe for mental health. I feel like, you know what? If you did it and it changed your life, that's good enough for me. Like, I'm not here to judge. And we've certainly seen that that's been applicable in the cannabis industry. I will say one thing that's definitely really interesting to me about the research is that in clinical trials investigating psychedelics, they use something called the Mystical Type Experience Questionnaire. And the Mystical Experience Questionnaire is actually a questionnaire that was created by a religious scholar decades before sort of the psychedelic renaissance to assess the extent to which someone had sort of like a divine or spiritual experience. It was actually designed originally to assess the mysticism of naturally occurring divine experiences, so like people who are fasting or meditating or whatever, but they use it as well in psychedelic clinical trials. And what they have found is that the more profound someone has is someone's mystical experiences, the more healing they actually receive from that psychedelic. So if you go into a clinical trial, for example, and you're taking psilocybin for nicotine addiction, right? You want to stop smoking and you're going into a clinical, you're tripping with the intention of doing that. If you have an experience where you feel deeply, deeply connected to the universe and things that are greater than yourself, and perhaps feel like you've connected with God, you are more likely to come out of that clinical trial actually succeeding at stopping smoking.
You know, that almost reminds me of, you know, I remember in certain experiences, certain journeys, wishing that I had a mental camera so that I could take this memory or this vision with me along the way, because it was so impactful to my experience. You know, I think when it comes to, you know, expanding our consciousness and really going into something like psychedelics with a mission, you know, I want to overcome alcoholism, I want to overcome smoking cigarettes. What about people that, you know, enter a trip and they're not in the right headspace and they're stuck in this realm for 12, 15 hours? What do you say to them? What can they do to help themselves when they feel like they've stumbled down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And at the risk of sounding like I'm just trying to plug DoubleBlind, we do cover all of this in our upcoming course on psychedelics, which I just say because I can't get into all of it now. But the first thing I would say is, if you are interested in doing a psychedelic for mental health, like if you are suffering from severe depression or trauma or some other condition, I would not suggest that you just trip like with your friends or by yourself. It's best to be in an environment, whether that is a retreat center or ceremony abroad or in a clinical trial where you have trained guides and therapists where you feel supported, so that if something like that is happening, they can help guide you through it. That being said, there are some fundamental principles for tripping and holding space for yourself that you can abide by if you find yourself in a challenging situation. Kind of like Psychedelics 101 is the notion of surrender, right? So the more that you try and push away whatever is coming up for you, the more that it's going to intensify. And so really all you can do is, and meditators will be familiar with this concept, is observe what's happening for you and get curious about it and breathe and kind of lean into it. It's the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, which is the main research nonprofit behind a lot of the psychedelic clinical trials, has really tried to demystify this notion of the bad trip and tried to get rid of this idea of the bad trip from the lexicon, because as soon as you start to perceive it as a bad trip, that can make the trip even worse, right? Like, bad trips aren't bad trips. They're just opportunities to go inward and to see what's happening for you on a really deep unconscious level, which is where the healing comes from.
Wow, that's very eye-opening, and I appreciate you saying that, because I myself feel like I have experienced good trips and bad trips, and that puts it in a different perspective for me. So thank you for that. Now, you did mention you're having a cultivation series. Was there a second series that you also mentioned?
Yeah, so we released a course in March on how to grow your own mushrooms in partnership with Dr. Kay Mandrake, who's kind of like the definitive psilocybin expert, mycologist in the psychedelic community. He wrote a book called The Psilocybin Mushroom Bible. And that walks people through every single stage of the grow process. It's designed for beginners, so people who are curious about growing mushrooms but are intimidated by the process. Maybe they don't have a lot of space in their apartment, maybe they don't have a lot of time, maybe they feel like they can't even keep their basil alive, so they're bound to fail. Like, yeah, that's me. I've killed like 10 basils in the last year. So this is what the course is designed for. It walks you through, we provide you with a list of supplies and links on where to get everything, including where to get spores. We provide you with live support from our mycologists. So once a week we have mushroom office hours, and our mycologists are live with students answering any questions for them, taking a look at their grows, being like, that looks great, or that looks terrible. Did you even read the materials? Just kidding, we're not mean, we're really nice. And then there's also an invite-only Slack that has more than 700 mushroom growers from around the world now who are on this Slack. So it's just so cute because everyone shares like, look at my mushroom, blah blah blah, like da da da, like making pasta with my oysters that I grew or whatever. So that's great. And then second course, as I mentioned, it's coming out next month, and it's really just the fundamentals of tripping and how to begin to embark on an intentional journey with plant medicines. Excellent.
So what is the mushroom community like for those of us that are interested in taking the course and we want to learn a little more? But we know the cannabis has such a close-knit community. What's the mushroom community like?
Well, our mushroom community is a little different than like the mushroom community at large, because our mushroom community is mostly, like I said, first-time growers, people who are just interested in psychedelics, interested in taking their health and wellness into their own hands. Like maybe they have some extra time on their hands because it's like COVID and everyone's just stuck at home. So that's like our mushroom growing community. The mushroom growing community at large is very, very passionate, and at the risk of being offensive, a little bit geeky. Like people are either don't grow mushrooms or they're like really, really into it and it's like a part of their identity. And then I would also say that the mushroom community and cannabis communities are very similar in that you do have a lot of people who kind of see mushroom growing as a political statement. It's not just about like a hobby that they enjoy doing, but it's about, we're in this really crazy time in the psychedelic movement where there are all of these stakeholders coming into the space, many of them perceiving psychedelics as kind of like the next green rush. They, major capital coming into the space, and people are kind of concerned about what does that mean for the accessibility of like these plants and these fungi that have been used for healing for thousands of years. And so when you are learning how to grow, you are not just like personally doing something that's fun, but you're actually joining like a movement that's spreading the globe to say, you know what, like I don't need to go to the pharmacy and buy my medicine. Like I can grow it right here in my own backyard or in my own house.
Bring it back to the backyard where we can grow all of our stuff. So, you touched a little bit on the I wouldn't say the laws of it, but I mean, let's talk about the laws for a minute. What is your hope for the next 2 to 5 years in this area?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a ton of really promising reform efforts within the psychedelic movement. I would say that they're kind of severed into 2 different branches, much like we saw in the cannabis movement. We have FDA-approved psychedelic research, as I mentioned, psilocybin should be legal as a prescription. Synthetic psilocybin should be legal as a prescription medication for treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorder within the next 3 to 5 years. MDMA also should be legal around that, in that same time frame, for treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. And then on the local level, we now have more than 100 cities and counties that are trying to replicate the initiative out of Oakland to decriminalize all naturally occurring entheogenic plants and fungi, from San Pedro to peyote to, I mean, if it's psychedelic and it comes out of the earth, basically. And so we're definitely going to see, I think, many, many more of those initiatives popping up and getting put in front of legislators and showing up on the ballot. And I think that in the next 12 months, we'll probably see Washington, D.C., Berkeley, and Chicago follow in the footsteps of Oakland, Santa Cruz, and Denver. We might see some other cities as well. So there's a lot of movement on that front. And then I guess like Oregon is kind of off on its own island because they have a really interesting initiative that's going to be going before voters in November to actually legalize medical psilocybin rather than decriminalize psilocybin. And so if this bill passes, we're going to be seeing state legal facilities and licensed facilitators and a state legal psilocybin supply for basically anyone who wants to use psilocybin to heal. So that would be pretty groundbreaking if that happens.
That would be awesome. I don't know if you've been to Amsterdam before, but I did the truffles over there, and when you're in it, you're like, why is this illegal? Nothing is exploding, the house isn't on fire, everything is normal, I'm fine, and
yeah,
I'm cool with the mushrooms. So, well, we look forward to seeing what that outcome is. And so for people that want to get involved, that want to take the class, that want to learn more, where can they go to find this information?
You can come to our website, DoubleBlindMag.com, and you can enroll in our mushroom course. You can enroll in our psychedelics course. Also, I just always like to say that, I said this before, but DoubleBlind is truly, truly a labor of love for my co-founder and I. And so we just want to support people on their journeys with plant medicines. And in addition to our courses, we publish tons of free educational content. We have free webinars. We are always available via DM on our Instagram. So you can literally just message us and be like, blah, 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 and I have this question, and we will answer you. So yeah, we're here for you, whatever you need.